a website, if it didn't have photos on it or motion, right,
Yeah,
it would just be text, and no one wants to look
for
at a
sure.
website like that, right? And so, in terms of the stock photography, as you're describing, there's like these stock celebrities. There's this guy with his white beard. There's this lady with this really short white hair, and it's even on some of the websites that do use mainly photography and in motion of a stock library from hiring a photographer. Even some of those stock celebrities still show up on those sites,
Yeah,
which is nuts. And so, and I agree with you in that when it's mostly stock photography, it's going to downgrade the quality, And now we're running to the AI issue too, where I can tell on some of these websites if they're using fake photos, and or or using AI images, pulled from the
sure.
internet. And I think that's an issue within itself too. While stock, Richard Avedon, really famous photographer, he says photography is always a manipulation of the truth, right? You're just freezing a moment in time, and there is truth in these portraits, right? Well, like stock photography is a major manipulation of the truth, right? AI is even a bigger manipulation of the
Sure.
truth, right? So
Yeah.
where do we draw that line in terms of authenticity, on these websites? And that's why it's always just better to shoot a large library of images. You can pull the marketing from all your communities to save money, and then the photos will last, I think, a year and a half to 2 years.
Welcome to The Move In, a senior living marketing podcast from Unlock Health, a full-service marketing partner for the aging services industry. Join us for candid conversations exploring the latest marketing strategies with the senior living community leaders and innovative solution partners who are moving our industry forward. Together, we'll build a community to build better communities. When someone visits your senior living website, do your photos build trust or quietly create doubt? Hello, I'm Larry Williams, and welcome to the Move In Senior Living Marketing powered by Unlock Health. In senior living, trust is everything. Long before a prospect schedules a tour, fills out a form, or speaks with a sales counselor, they're already forming opinions about your community based on what they see online. Your website, social media channels, brochures, and digital ads all tell a story. But if the imagery feels outdated, overly staged, or relies too heavily on stock photography, it can create skepticism instead of confidence. And in an industry where trust drives decisions, that's a risk no operator can afford to take. Today's episode is the final installment in our Trust is the Currency series, and we're focusing on one of the most powerful and often overlooked ways senior living communities build trust: authentic visual storytelling. I'm joined by Tom Sanders, owner of Senior Living Photography and nationally recognized photographer and filmmaker who has spent more than 2 decades capturing the stories of older adults and helping senior living communities showcase real residents, real experiences, and real life. In our conversation, we explore why authentic imagery matters more than ever in today's digital world, how communities can create photo and video content that genuinely reflects daily life, and why visual storytelling will play an even greater role as the next generation of residents and families begin their search for senior living options. If trust starts before a tour is ever scheduled, then the images prospects see online may be one of the most important marketing assets your community has. In this conversation, we discuss why authentic resident photography consistently performs stock photos and AI-generated imagery when it comes to building trust and emotional connection. Also, best practices for planning and executing photo shoots that capture genuine moments and showcase the unique personality of your community, and how senior living operators can modernize their visual storytelling and leverage video motion content to better connect with today's consumers and tomorrow's residents. If you're responsible for marketing, sales, occupancy, or brand strategy, this is a conversation you don't want to miss. All right, let's get into it. We were on the Move in Senior Living Marketing. We got a friend of mine, another friend, Tom Sanders. Tom is the owner of Tom Sanders Photography and Films and Senior Living Photography. Also, Tom is a professor at Savannah College of Art and Design. And I really appreciate Tom joining us today because, as we wrap up the Trust is the Currency series, a big part of how we develop this trust is through imagery and photography. So, Tom, thank you for joining us today and sharing your insights and advice. And before we go further, please introduce yourself and tell us, what you're working on these days.
Yeah, so I started doing photo shoots for senior living for the senior living industry when I was about 21 years old, which is kind of crazy. And I always start out with my kind of same story. I photographed this World War II veteran that was living next door to me in college at the senior living community. I just walked in there one day, got off the bus, and I approached the executive director there. And I said, is there any interesting people to photograph? And they said, hey, we have this World War II veteran here. And I ended up photographing him. And he told me this really wild war story that helped put my life into perspective, and the sense of worrying about the small things in life. My grandfather was in World War II. And then his brother, Robert Sanders, died in the Battle of the Bulge. And then I said, hey, I want to travel the country, photograph as many World War II veterans as I could. This is when I was about 21 years old. And then Belmont Village Senior Living discovered my project. And the crazy thing is, now that I'm 42, essentially, I've been photographing war veterans and seniors for 20 years. So
Wow.
about half my life, which is
That's
kind of
incredible.
crazy. Yeah, I never, if someone from the future approached me in a time machine and said, Tom, you're going to be, spending most of your career doing photo shoots and, commercials for the senior living industry, I'd be like, well, are you sure? Like that's what I'm doing. And
It's
that's,
so funny where your life takes you. And the quote I've been repeating constantly is you can't get in the way of your own destiny. And that, this life has a plan for you and it's incredible. None of us expect to get to the point we're in, and it takes twists and turns, but man, just let it go where it needs to go and you end up in really cool places. And I think it's evident with what you're doing these days and where it's taking you. I'm sure you have so many stories. You've heard so many stories. And the coolest part about some of your work is it's at airports, it's at different locations. You have your artwork is spread across the country.
mhm. Yeah, and that's mainly with Belmont Village. They got us into the Chicago O'Hare Airport with the war veterans, the Midway Airport. I believe it's still up in the Dallas Airport. I should know that, at the Love Airport. I guess that's a good problem to have. And you're like, is my gallery still up? I'm not sure, but I should know. And then every Belmont Village has it's called American Heroes Project, has a permanent gallery in pretty much all their communities around the country. But yeah, it's funny because in my mid 20s, I started to photograph some kind of famous celebrities and stuff. And, I was living in LA, but once I got into my late 20s, once I really committed to just primarily working with the senior living industry, the more niche oriented you are, that's how you get the most work in terms of, being really specialized in, a particular industry. And that's when it really just exploded for me.
Sure. And that's, I think that's a great segue because why I want to directly speak with you today and why this is really taken off for you is because it is a niche market. But
Mhm.
because of that, you can lean in and guide it. You're not just showing up as a photographer and like, all right, what do you want to do? How do you want to go about this? You're
Mhm.
guiding this approach. And there's a lot of emotional attachments that come with, when you're providing photography service at the community itself. So, how do those engagements typically work? Because I know that's what you bring to the table. You're directing what does the day look like? How do
Mhm.
you get started in this process?
Typically, companies, most of the time, I'm doing like a photo shoot with motion for like for a larger like national campaign, or it's regional. Some of my clients do have me go to their individual communities to shoot architecture and photography. And a very small percentage of the time are we actually photographing models. I would say 95% of the time we're just photographing real residents. So the first big step is, if the company is just figuring out what are some of the popular amenities that they offer, and also how does that match up with some of the other communities? Because when you shoot at one community, let's say in Florida, that community might not look like the one that they have in California or something like that. But this is, of
Yeah.
course, for representing the larger advertising. And so the big thing is we try and figure out like the 7 or 8 scenes that we can shoot and film in one day. And there's usually a pool scene. There's always a dining scene. I'm starting to see more pickleball courts at communities, at least a little bit younger ones,
Yeah.
or kind of 55 plus communities. And so that's the big thing, is just identifying that shot list and then finding residents that are willing to participate. One thing too is, one big tip I could offer is sometimes residents are hesitant to want to like model for us because they're not actual models, right? There's some
Sure.
discomfort with that, and it messes with their routine. But when you can give them some sort of incentive, free rent for a month, I'm just kidding. But no one's gonna do that. But when you can give them, I don't know, a gift card or some happy hour perk or something like that, then they're like more likely to want to do it. One thing that we do run into is we don't have enough residents to photograph throughout the day. So we end up photographing some of the same restaurants in the pickleball shot that might end up being the dining shot, which is fine. I mean, it's like when you're in marketing, you're looking at the same photos all the time, it might feel repetitive to you, but that audience, those, prospective residents and those family members, they're never going to like look at your advertising and be like, oh, that guy was in that shot and that guy was in that shot. But that's one thing I wish I had on most of these photo shoots. It's just, we use a lot of the same residents over and over throughout the day. And I think that just usually, I think the challenge that we run into is, when the corporate team is communicating to the at the community level, sometimes some of that communication can just get a little bit lost or
Sure.
confusing. And at the community level, and as you know, like the activities director, the sales executive director, they have a lot of other stuff going on, and then they have to help like essentially be a producer on this big photo shoot.
Yeah.
And so that's where they get spread thin. And so that's something that I always had a little. I just wish we had a little more I wish we had more residents to photograph, just
Sure.
so the client ends up having a larger library of more usable images.
Yeah, it's I remember speaking with you at a conference. You're talking about the resident engagement. How initially some might be a little hesitant, but when they get comfortable, they're all in. They're excited about it. They feel like they're a celebrity,
Mhm.
and that's one area that I think you've mentioned before, which is you can actually get the excitement in it, let it build throughout the day, and then that can increase other participation. Do you find that to be true? Like as you go through the photo shoots?
Yeah, if you get a little wine involved, a little beer too, they'll kind of
It never
loosen
hurts,
up.
right?
Yeah, it is helpful, to be honest. A lot of the
Yeah,
time, they
sure.
can kind of cut loose a little bit more. But yeah, they get to be like Hollywood stars for the day, and then when they actually get to see their photos on the websites or in print advertising and all that, then that actually, I think it makes them feel extra special. And we're also getting to celebrate aging and the activities that they're actually doing at their communities.
Yeah. So, do you give everyone a heads up before you show up in terms of, hey, let's get the group together that you think would be a great fit? We can speak to them. How does that process of getting the residents together and which ones are going to appear in the photography? How does that kind of play out?
Yeah, again, we're really dependent at the community level in terms of whoever that point of contact is, who's coordinating with the residents to make sure they're there on time. So,
Mhm.
so the big thing, like I was saying, we got to identify what the 7 or 8 scenes are a day, which is a lot.
Mhm.
I have one
Yeah.
client that likes to do about 4 a day, which is actually a nice amount. um, Identifying what the scenes are. It's good to take the real residents that might actually play pickleball or do yoga or partake in the happy hour. They're actually in those spaces to photograph them because it becomes more authentic. Sometimes we do have hair and makeup on set, so sometimes they're showing up an hour before the scene. And the big thing too, I always say this, is that I have a flannel in my closet that's probably 22 years old. I love that flannel, right? But the residents will show up wearing that 22-year-old flannel, right?
Sure.
And so we really have to always communicate with them and make sure it's semi-formal or formal, or go to TJ Maxx or Macy's or whatever,
Yeah.
and just have some backup clothing as well. And then regionally, we don't want them wearing an Oakland A's shirt, or I guess Las Vegas A's now or whatever,
Yeah.
49er shirt, just because in advertising, you generally can't see another logo. Like if we're
Yeah.
pouring wine, you got to turn that wine bottle around so you don't see the label. So those are the things that we're in tune to make sure it's not distracting from the brand.
Yeah, absolutely. It's and I think about like why this is so important. I'm gonna go back to the why behind it all. As a marketing agency, unlike health, we create websites for or optimize websites for health and wellness providers, whether that's health systems, hospitals, behavioral health, and senior living. So much of that is just showing true, authentic photos, and I think authenticity is wildly important more than any other time. Just with AI, and as groups want to really see what life at the community looks like.
Mhm.
And I think that's so important now as we look at websites, and that's the first thing that shows, just like that hits my mind when I look at a website for the first time, like stock photography, really old photography. You
Mhm.
have to really be intentional about keeping the imagery up, having it look fresh, but it has to be authentic to that community. And so to me, I just imagine you're going on set and you're guiding this process and kind of like you said, you have that sheet for the day that we're going to do this, 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 and this.
Mhm.
But I can only imagine that while you're there, you point out other things that we're like, hey, what about that? Tell me about that. Like, you need to shoot that. Like, why are we not over here taking pictures of that? Like, I can only imagine that you're actually seeing things from a different perspective and bringing that to the table.
This is probably not the smartest thing to say, but if a website, if it didn't have photos on it or motion, right,
Yeah,
it would just be text, and no one wants to look
for
at a
sure.
website like that, right? And so, in terms of the stock photography, as you're describing, there's like these stock celebrities. There's this guy with his white beard. There's this lady with this really short white hair, and it's even on some of the websites that do use mainly photography and in motion of a stock library from hiring a photographer. Even some of those stock celebrities still show up on those sites, so,
Yeah,
which is nuts. And so, and I agree with you in that when it's mostly stock photography, it's going to downgrade the quality, And now we're running to the AI issue too, where I can tell on some of these websites if they're using fake photos, and or or using AI images, pulled from the
sure.
internet, and I think that's an issue within itself too. While stock, Richard Avedon, really famous photographer, he says photography is always a manipulation of the truth, right? You're just freezing a moment in time, and there is truth in these portraits, right? Well, like stock photography is a major manipulation of the truth, right? AI is even a bigger manipulation of the
Sure.
truth, right? So
Yeah.
where do we draw that line in terms of authenticity, on these websites? And that's why it's always just better to just shoot a large library of images. You can pull the marketing from all your communities to save money, and then the photos will last, I think, a year and a half to 2 years, in terms of making sure it doesn't feel outdated. I think it should be refreshed every few years too.
Yeah, I agree. And is that one of the major areas that senior living operators get wrong when it comes to storytelling, specifically when it comes to imagery, in terms of, it's old, it's outdated, or is there something else you want to highlight as a major issue when it comes to this side of business?
Yeah, but I think changing up the visual storytelling in terms of, there's like Margaritaville, right? That's like extreme hip, right? That like it's some kind of ball of wax in terms of their storytelling. They're selling this tropical party lifestyle. I'm not saying that all senior living websites need to start looking like that. We really need to start thinking more about the baby boomer audience
Hmm.
and appealing to more hip, cool imagery. It's not like they need to be wearing black leather jackets and, you know, like look like hippies or something like that in terms of being baby boomers, you know what I mean? In that extreme sense. But the, the visual storytelling is just sort of antiquated, and we need to be showing more modern activities of what these future residents are actually doing in their day-to-day life.
Yeah, I mean, you highlighted pickleball. I think that's an easy go-to just right there. Are
Mhm.
there some other, like, I'd say old versus new, like that you see on a constant basis, or something where, okay, the puck is going this direction. That's where we need to skate to. I didn't know if you had any advice on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think art activities. I mean, in some senior living, like a lot of my clients, the average age of a resident moving in, might be 85 years old, right? And so, or maybe 80, early 80s, maybe not 85. So I don't know if some of those residents are playing pickleball, right?
Sure,
But for y- like art, for example, like the art classes, always just like an art easel and a canvas. It's like, should they be doing sculpture? What are some more modern art activities that they can
sure.
show? Even just jewelry making. I've shot that one time, only one other time for Cozier Senior Living in Scottsdale, Arizona, and that was still like something a little bit more fun and modern. So that, and it's not like we want to be. It's not like companies should be inaccurate when creating these, these advertising images. You should still be doing actual activities they're doing at the communities, but it's just having a little more of that modern twist in there is what I think is really, really important.
Yeah, I feel like it's just showing life and activity, not
Mhm.
just sitting. You want to show vibrancy, and that's what, whether like you said, one group might be pickleball, this other group might be art, but you just want to show community and life, vibrancy, and
Mhm.
that's going to really help more than anything else. Question for you, I've wanted to ask you this question for a while.
Yeah.
How do you make a photo feel more authentic than staged? I can't I can only imagine how challenging that is, because even when I take pictures with my family, if I get their attention, everybody stops and looks, much less like that, just the fun in the moment. And so I was curious to see how you go about that. Is it just randomly taking pictures, or do you try to get them to have a certain scenario?
Yeah, that's a two-part question. So when we do these larger lifestyle photo shoots, like there's myself, we have a digital tech. So when I'm shooting to a computer, and then the digital tech is monitoring all the images that are going onto the computer, and then the client gets to see the photos really large on the computer. So they get to approve all the images as we're shooting, right? And then I might have two photo assistants. Sometimes we have hair and makeup. Not all the photo shoots are always this big. Like I did a photo shoot for Kisco Senior Living in Greensboro the other week. There's myself, the digital tech, two assistants, and then the two clients on set. Brian and John are these phenomenal filmmaker guys that have a really strong background in creativity. So they're there helping out as well. But um, in terms of authenticity, it's like I think having a larger crew helps. And a lot of the lighting we're creating, it is fake. Sometimes we're putting like a strobe light through the window. I shouldn't say it's always fake, but there's like a reflector in there. There's like a strobe light going through the window. And then it's just taking a lot of photos. And I say stupid things like, if I have a couple, I might say, tell me about your honeymoon night, and that like usually gets like a good uncomfortable, cackle out of them. And I just try and throw them off a little bit to capture more authenticity in the photos. And then when you're shooting like sort of more documentary images, such as the World War II veterans, or there's that cyclist I photographed a long time ago who rode his bike. He was 92 and rode his bike 150 miles a week. When that story already exists, such as that cyclist or that war veteran, and they show up holding that young photo of themselves wearing holding some sort of, war relic, or the cyclist is standing there with his bike and his bike, outfit. The story's already there, right?
Sure.
This is my job to take my creative interpretation on that and create, as strong as storytelling or strong as story as I can kind of come up with. And just because I've been doing this for so long, I have a pretty good, I don't know, sense of confidence in terms of, knowing what's going to work and what's not going to work. And I failed enough to, kind of do it, somewhat quickly too. And that's something I was just thinking about on these photo shoots and I guess sort of commercials. When you're shooting 7 scenes in a day, one scene might be an hour. So we have to go in there, we have to light it super quickly. We got to make sure the residents look nice, find that environment. Maybe I'm seeing this environment for the first time. Maybe I didn't get to scout the day before. And so we have to act somewhat quickly. And that's something I'm just really good at. I always like to shoot near windows. I don't think the interiors of senior living communities, there should always be a window in there somewhere, I think.
Sure.
Because that's where it starts to feel like a nursing facility or a nursing home, right? Like show some window light in there. That's something I always try and utilize. So anyways, I don't know if that answers your question or not, but
Yeah, and I keep throwing some loaded questions at you that have like
yeah.
multiple parts. So no, that's your advice and your feedback. And all I was thinking about, and this is not a commercial for Tom Sanders, even though that I'm constantly praising his work and telling a lot of our clients about what he's doing. Because again, you are going in and guiding the process. And I think that's huge. Just having that background as well as, uh, you understand how important it is to get these certain shots and get them, through quickly. And like you said, there's a lot going on, and to set the stage for success, I think
Mhm.
that's key. And I appreciate your feedback and your direction. A question for you. This just came to mind as you were telling me all about this. What's your advice when it comes to digital asset management? I know you do a lot of
Mhm.
video work, a ton of photo work.
Mhm.
What's your advice to communities and operators who are trying to like take all of this imagery and keep it housed where it doesn't go into a some type of drive and die, but it's actually tagged and you can really go back into it for the next year or two?
Yeah, I mean, the way we do our photo shoots is the client always leaves with that hard drive, and then our digital tech will have processed all those photos and organize it into folders, right? So it's, you know, whatever, the Smith Senior Living Community is the main folder, and then we have all our raw images organized in these different scenes throughout the day, and our digital tech will process all the images into these subfolders as large JPEGs. So a lot of times, while I end up editing the photos for my client, some of the photos are just ready to go and they can be used in advertising right away without any sort of Photoshop because we've already taken care of it on our end on the day of the shoot. And so I think those JPEGs should be uploaded, in a Dropbox folder somewhere. I mean, you could probably answer this, but it feels like most of my clients are pretty organized for the most
Good.
part in
Yeah.
terms of uploading those images somewhere in some sort of cloud, right? Or
Yeah,
do you
I
find
I find the power of the right digital asset management software to make that process much easier and much more efficient, so you
Mm,
can go in and find exactly what you're looking for without opening, closing, going through each image. So I just think that's really important to make sure it stays organized so you can get the most out of that initial investment for services like yours.
yeah, I always compare, image management like my closet. Like, you have your socks and underwear in one area and your jeans. I mean, that's how my closet is. I'm not like OCD about it, but
Yeah,
that's what I'm trying to.
everything has its space.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and that's I think everyone brains functions differently, and so whoever's like the main person that's in charge in terms of organizing those images really has to make sense mostly for them in the sense of accessing everything, which can be a little bit hard in terms of turnover at companies and stuff like that. But
sure.
yeah, it's a good question. There, and obviously it's not the most exciting thing to talk about file management, but
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, if you can't find your images, it's you they're not doing anything for you. So
Yeah, I always think about that initial investment, whether it's the time, the money, but how do you get the most out of that?
mhm,
And I've spoken to others about that. Just make sure you get as much longevity out of those steps as you can. I'm going to take a step back.
yeah,
From your point of view, when you see some websites, and if you eat some outdated visual, say, imagery that
mhm.
makes you like cringe a little bit, or is there anything specific when you see it, you're like, oh man, why do they have that? Like I need to talk to that group. Is there anything specific that bothers you more than others?
Yeah, it's just I think some companies aren't willing to spend the money on
Hmm.
photography. They might have like a cheap Shutterstock account
Yeah,
or cheap Adobe account where people are using all the same photos, and I don't really think it's that expensive to shoot a large library of images for your collateral and marketing for that's going to last you a few years in terms of breaking it up. But I think it's just more of the outdated images. We've probably talked about this in the past. There's that one group photo where they're this ethnically diverse group of seniors that probably aren't even the age demographic of actual residents. They're like in a park somewhere and they're all looking at the camera. Like I see
yeah,
that just all the time. And we should be representing ethnic diversity on these websites, but it's just like this cheap low hanging fruit that these companies are buying to throw on there. And I think companies could try it. Not there's I think some companies could just try it a little bit harder in terms of creating better imagery.
Yeah,
But
and I just jumping in there, I agree with you. That's probably mine that bothers me the most is when it's just that it looks like somebody just walked around with their phone for the day and just took pictures and they're like, all right, well, that'll work. And don't
Mhm.
get me wrong, it's authentic, but it doesn't really showcase community. It doesn't showcase life. It all you have to do is polish it a little bit more. And that investment into a professional photographer is going to pay in dividends for a year or two to come. So that's for me, it's on that side, which is the really poor quality of the photography. But then on the other side, we spoke about it earlier, which is obvious stock photos, which is this has nothing to do with your community. I can't even see your community. Those definitely are residents. And I've probably seen that same photo on other websites, and those
Right.
two bother me so much. And so, if you have that on your website, give Tom a call because he can definitely help you out.
Well, you're right in this is a misrepresentation of the community when they're showing stock images. That means that's not even accurate to what that company's offering. So that's another thing that companies should be thinking about. Also, like I was gonna say, is even when we're looking for models to photograph, like in
Mm,
Los Angeles or these big metropolitan areas, it's still hard to come by senior models that represent the communities in terms of the visuals. And so anyways, I'm just saying it's a hard subject to capture and be a good story and also be a good storyteller.
yeah, for sure. And I appreciate you highlighting that. And again, it goes back to make sure you have the right people who can guide that process. Where do you see, want to talk about visual storytelling? Where do you see this going in the future? Of course, we know with the silver tsunami and the demand that's already hit us and will continue to grow. What do you see this look like? How does this look like in the next 5 years?
I think we should see more motion. I think that's a big
Mm,
part of it. I think
yeah,
we know that motion can sometimes get like up to 600% more views or something like that in
yeah.
comparison to stills. And so as the technology gets better on these websites and the video website playback, plays back more quickly, I think that's something that we should be seeing a lot more of.
So, we just yesterday was Father's Day. So happy Father's Day to you. We got
Thanks.
to hear your daughters in the background earlier. Made me happy as another girl dad, like hearing them play. Hey, just living that summer life. But my daughter Hazel, for Father's Day, she made a quick video that just had probably I think 8 pictures of us, and it really told a story. Like
Mhm.
I'm telling you, I've probably watched it 40 times. It's made
Yeah.
me so happy. And she said, like, man, we're having fun, we're living life. And I agree with you, which is the motion, you're telling a story. I think that's really ultimately where we need to continue to lean into is really showcasing life and energy at these communities. So yeah, just think about that yesterday based on her present to me. It really made me happy. So Tom, you've been doing some work with Lola Rains and speaking at different webinars. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, Lola is a client of mine, and I think I started working with Lola about 15 years ago, and she's been applying to some of these conferences where we're guest speakers. We did one at Leading Age in Boston last year. We've done one at Smash. We've done it at Argentum. And the cool thing about these conferences, and you know this, is you just have to like fill out a speaker form, and then like if you're a part of that organization as a member, if they accept your what's the term? Not your form, just your application for
Yeah.
speaking. It's like sometimes they'll waive your fee for that week because going to some of these conferences can be super expensive. And so that's like another like kind of not free perk because you always have to fly out there and get a hotel and stuff that like we all have access to. And so that's how Lola and I have been teamed up. She'll talk a lot about the kind of website side of things and kind of the legalities, and then I'll talk about just a lot of my photo shoot and filmmaking tips.
That's awesome. And I'll say this, if you see Tom at a conference, stop him, talk to him, get his advice. He's such a great resource. He's one of my favorites to connect with. We talk about, you know, all things in life. Like it doesn't have to stay to senior living marketing. We talk about, like being a parent. We talked about just anything that comes to mind. So definitely stop, say hi to them. Tom, where can people find you if they want to learn more about your services and what you're up to these days?
Yeah. By the way, for Father's Day, my wife got me a shirt that said "Outnumbered by Girls." So.
Love it. Same here.
um, seniorlivingphotography.com is my main website. And then I have another one called tomsandersphoto.com. And yeah, you can see it all on there, from my lifestyle, amenity photos, architectural, short documentaries. And then we have some social media content management on there too.
Awesome. Tom, thank you so much for sharing with us, and looking forward to the next conversation with you.
Thank you, Larry. Appreciate it.
As we wrap up today's episode, I want to thank Tom Sanders for joining us and sharing his expertise on the power of visual storytelling in senior living. One thing that really stood out to me from our conversation is that every image tells a story. It shapes first impressions, builds trust, and helps prospective residents and families envision what life could look like within your community. But before we go, here are 3 actionable takeaways that I made notes of during our conversation. First, audit your current imagery. Take a fresh look at your website, brochures, and social media channels. If you're relying on outdated photos, stock imagery, or visuals that don't accurately represent your community today, it may be time for an update. Second, create a strategic photo library. Invest in professional photography that captures a variety of resident experiences, activities, amenities, and interactions. A well-planned photo shoot can provide valuable content that supports your marketing efforts for years to come. And third, show lifestyle, not just the community. Prospective residents aren't simply evaluating a building, they're imagining their future. Focus on imagery that showcases vibrant experiences, meaningful connections, and the lifestyle your community offers. Trust is built through authenticity, and in today's digital-first world, your imagery often speaks before anyone on your team has the opportunity to. So make sure it's telling the right story. Thank you again to Tom Sanders for joining us today, and until next time, let's go create some meaningful connections.